Hello and welcome to the Sovereign Career Hub podcast. This week I'm speaking to Andrew Jacobs. He's the man to blame for me even having this podcast in the first place because he inspired me to do it with his wonderful festival that we had earlier this year. So we'll probably touch on those sort of things soon because you'll find that Andrew is a very inspiring person. He's a learning strategist and organizational impact advisor. He helps organizations move learning beyond training and into capability. That's really important. So beyond the delivery, beyond the supply, and into capability, into performance and measurable organization impact. There's a lot there for us to unpack, actually, Andrew, and I love that. But before I leave that, I'll just say that you're also founder of LAN Learning, chartered fellow of the CIPD, and producer of Women Talking About Learning, which is a podcast. And although I haven't been invited on yet, I'm absolutely determined to keep pestering away at you. So eventually, I hope I shall appear there. And he writes daily at his blog, desperate.com, which, I mean, well, you'll just have to go and see what it's all about, really, because how could you not with a wonderful title like that? So welcome, Andrew Jacobs. It's lovely to see you and thank you for coming along. I'm hoping that you will
Thank you for
start
the
by
invite, Carolyn.
well, I'm hoping you'll start by telling us where you are in the country and also what room you're broadcasting from today.
I'm in a very hot East London. The room I'm in is where I do all of my online activity. I'm lucky enough with some bookcases and things behind me that it makes the sound quite good. I've also got a very big microphone and a voice built for podcasting. So
yes, you have, and we've shared a bit about that before we started because my microphone contraption is also delicately balanced here, actually, on the right-hand side. I'm hoping it stands up to the rigor of this interview. But at least I remember to turn it on, which I didn't do last week. It's all happening. I remember what you said to me, Carolyn, just do it. And that was the message, I think, from, I know I call it Podfest, but did you call it something else?
we did abbreviate it to Podfest. It was such an inspiring day, just getting L&D people, podcast people together in the same room and just talk about how we could do this stuff better. It was so inspiring. I had so many great conversations. There was a hum of conversation all day, which was amazing.
Yeah, it really was. And so thank you on behalf of everybody else for actually doing that because I'm putting that on because I know it's a lot of work. If you look back over your career, I know that you talk a lot about learning and how it works, and you've given a great deal of thought to all of this. So when I ask this question, you know, I don't expect you to have a soundbite sort of answer, but I'd love you to give us an indication. What are the major changes that you've seen?
The obvious one to say is technology. I started off using, overhead projectors and so on, and e-learning just wasn't known. It was big laser disc kind of thing. And that's the obvious answer. But actually, I think it's more fundamental than that. I think it's the impact of the technology. We're in a space now where if you take a new recruit on, a school leaver, joins your organization, they're younger than the iPhone. So they've grown up completely engaged in the digital world, that they have lived in a digital space. Their whole life has been digital. And that's a very different approach. Now, what there are is lots of legends and artifacts from the way that we used to do things. And I up until about 2010, 2009, I used to be one of those old school, sage on the stage, stick me in front of a room of people and I'll talk at them and everybody will learn something. Isn't that great? And in 2009, realized that actually we'd moved on. I was working in local government. We had no money. I had to do things differently and found that, do you know what? People learn from other people. It's a social construct that we build around learning rather than just the individual sage. And then it became about cooperative, coordinated learning to how to put people together. And then technology has enhanced that. So for me, that's the biggest change, that it's not about a single point of knowledge. It's more about where are the various points of knowledge that people can pull together themselves. You say you don't want a soundbite. There is one, which is turning fibers into fabric. There is previously people had to come to a place to buy the fabric. Now they can weave it together themselves, pulling lots of different fibers themselves.
Yes, there's a lot of autonomy now, isn't there? And that probably is one of the biggest sea changes that we've seen from, as you say, this is what you're having through to what do you need?
So learning used to be just in case and just in time. So it was done by organizations to people at a time when the organization wanted it done. We've moved beyond that to just for me, and post-pandemic, just enough. So it's now from an individual perspective, that self-selection, the self-direction, but even the self-determination, which is slightly different, where I actually choose for myself the things that I want to learn, not from your menu, but that I want to learn myself. And that's the just enough element. So your learning catalog, what value is there? Probably very little.
Yes, but then doesn't that rely on the data within the organization being absolutely tip top for you to be able to choose what you need, tap into it, and actually be guided by, alignment with the organization's needs? Otherwise, we're going to be just going off, just doing the stuff we want to do, aren't we?
Which is what's happening. That's what's happening. That's what's always happened. That we've always thought that we managed learning. No, we didn't. We managed the organization delivered learning, but actually learning happens all the time, everywhere, throughout an organization. Learning is the conversation at the coffee bar, the conversation at the water cooler, the post-it notes stuck on the screen, the email messages, the Teams chats, and so on. That's the learning that has always happened in an organization. But now, with more technologies, people could do it themselves.
Yeah, that's interesting, because this was one of the reasons I wanted to start this podcast, was so that we could learn from each other. We could learn from the lived experience of another person. At what point do we identify that this is good or not for the organization?
And the eternal return on investment question then. So any
Yeah.
conference you go to, there will be somebody talking about ROI or proving our worth or being at the table and so on. And the big issue there is it comes back to that word busyness. We're great in L&D at busyness, not business. Business with a Y, not business with an I. And that's because we use learning language. We talk about, Maslow and Kirkpatrick, and, we throw all these EDBJ things at people and go, you're this type of person or whatever. When we use a jargon which doesn't relate to people in the workplace.
I have actually. There was a J in
it. I've no idea. I've never done that test, the Myers Briggs thing. I've never done it. I don't want to. It's, I challenge the value of it. Again, where's the data that proves it makes a difference? That's a different question. So for me, it's all about the performance data. And this is one of the challenges we've got in L&D. What we've done is we become shopkeepers. We become the people where the organization makes a decision that we want to do X, and we put lots of things in place and then go to the learning function and go, I'd like a course, please. And we go, absolutely, sir, a course. And how many would you like on this course? What's the cohort size? And how many cohorts? Excellent. And face-to-face or e-learning? Face-to-face, brilliant. And how many days can we have out the office? A day, 1 day, fabulous. And what would you like in this course? Would you like some sparkly new gamification? Oh, that sounds interesting. We throw another term in and we package this up and we present it to the business, and the business goes, yes, we've got a course, and we produce that. But does it actually make any difference? Probably not, because we've been involved in the conversation too late to actually see whether that was the right thing to be doing. You mentioned in my bio, I talked about capability, and that to me is the big issue, is we focus on the ability part of capability and not the cap part of capability, which is capacity, and helping the organization understand the space to perform as much as the skill to perform.
Yes, that is absolutely beautiful way of putting it. So if we're going to get involved earlier in the conversation or in the process, where and how do we know when to what are we looking for?
So that the key thing is, what are you being asked to do? And this is the question. And there's 3 great words that I use in every conversation when people challenge this stuff. There's 3 words. And when someone says, oh, I'd like a course about improving manager performance, and the 3 words you use are help me understand. And you say to that person, help me understand why a course is going to improve performance, or help me understand what training you think will improve performance, or help me understand what performance is going to look like, improved performance is going to look like to you. And these 3 words work in this order. Help. I don't know. You have more information than me, so I'm ceding the authority to you. So it immediately puts that person in a stronger place. Me, it's not about the function. It's me as an individual. What do I not know? And so again, I'm showing I want to help you. And thirdly, understand, which is about the context that you're operating in. So I can talk about all the things that I do. Understanding is, what's the context that was really driving this issue, and help me understand what that will then look like in the future. And those three words are so powerful to start a conversation.
Yeah, and they're critical. I can see immediately, as soon as you articulate those words, they become very powerful because, well, they're doing the thing which we know, if we've done any sort of work on agile or anything, that you must get to the problem. You must understand what the problem is. As a lawyer, this was one of the areas of main contention. A client would expect, they would ask you for a result, which was, you knew once you dug into it, you found out was completely solving the wrong problem. So yeah, and that has been the bane of all project managers' lives, I think, ever since the world began. But that is critical, and I can quite see how those words, and I'm going to probably use them this week to help if I can. Can I steal those and attribute them to
Steal
you?
with pride. Steal with pride. I talk about all this stuff all the time. I put it out there, and feel free. Yeah, steal with pride.
Thank you. So I will, because I'll use those in the resource, because I think they're going to be really helpful. And getting down to this return on investment, this is about understanding, because we can use this here now. Could say, okay, so return on investment, that's going to be the first thing that comes knocking on your door. Well, I paid all this money. The budget's been allocated. We've paid all this money, but what needle have we moved the needle? And the question being, well, what needle were we meant to be moving? I don't even know which needle we were supposed to be moving most of the time. You just asked for something, which I gave you. It's almost shocking that we can have taken that approach as business people, isn't it?
Yeah. So the value is the perceived benefit divided by the cost. Okay. Something has no value if it is just inherently cost. And so if you can't justify the perceived benefit, you have no value to the organization. This is why the question has to be moved from, did you build a course? Yes, we did. Did people turn up? Yes, they did. Were they happy? Yes, they were. Because the perceived benefit is anchored into the learning and development status within the organization. If the perceived benefit is managers were perceived by their teams to be friendlier, happier, more efficient, the internal controls were better supported, the mandated activity was completed as it should be, the audit and compliance activities were done, customers were happy, customers, new customers thought that they were you doing better, existing customers thought you were doing better, supply chain customers thought you were doing better. Those are three really simple measures that you could ask, and that's benefit to the business. Now, all of a sudden, you're not just about learning anymore. You're actually talking business with an I.
Yeah. Okay. I understand that. And so do you think then that, well, if we're talking about measuring impact, I know you've got quite a lot of thoughts about measuring impact, and you've got some really nice systems that you put in or help people put in place for them to measure. And one of those, which I'm interested in as well, Andrew, is where you help people. It stuck with me when you told me about it, was where you check in. You're checking in to find out, was it 7 hours, 7 days, 7 weeks, whatever it was. And it was a cycle. And I really liked that. Tell me what you would expect people to do with that in reality. Maybe you've got an example of how it's worked.
Yeah, so we call it power of 10. But you can call it
7.
power of 8 or power of 6, power of 7. It's up to you. Power of 10. And the power of 10 is quite simple. 10 days after you ask, so what? So 10 days ago, you did a thing. So what? What happened? What changed? What difference was made? Any difference? No difference? Some difference? It should have had an effect in some form or another. If it hasn't had an effect, if I'm an L&D person and I'm firing out things and saying, okay, 10 days afterwards, has it had an effect? And it hasn't, I've got to be looking at what I do. 10 weeks later, I ask the question, now what? So 10 weeks after you did something, has something fundamentally changed for you? Because now, what are you doing differently that you weren't doing before? How has it impacted on your work? Now we're beginning to get into those outcomes and impacts and those customer conversations and employee conversations and so on, where we would expect to see things being done differently. The last one, 10 months, is, and what? And what changed as a result? So I would see some business benefit. If you want to take it even longer, you could go 10 quarters. if you're building long-term plans on this. And this is the measurement towards how we plan for the organization that we don't do in L&D. This is the moving from a shopkeeper to an engineer. Shopkeeping is we sell the product, shut the doors, and the person leaves. The engineer goes in, checks, builds it, makes sure it's working, and then constantly is going back to check and make sure that the thing is still working in the way it should, because we don't want that thing to fail in 10 days, 10 weeks, or 10 months.
Bearing in mind that AI is having such a massive impact on the way we learn and the way we do things and the judgments we make and the workflows we operate. And I know that you and I often talk about, workforce, the impact on the workforce, but we're talking now about strategic workforce management, aren't we? And that's different, because that's actually now aligning it with the business and being able to say, because I'm in the weeds with jobscaping. I do a lot more stuff around the individual and helping people to manage that process themselves and their own career individually with AI and the relationship they have with it.
Yeah.
But this is about linking that up to the organization. So how would you go about doing that if you were let's say, CLO of a mid-sized business, or let's put a number on it. Let's say 3,000 people.
So the first thing I'd be doing, So the first thing I'd be doing is going back to the head of people and going, what's our strategic workforce plan for the next 3 years? And what does it look like? What's our baseline? What are we looking at and anticipating? And that then is a range of things. So we're looking at a range of different aspects of retention, churn, turnover, business performance, and so on. Now, this is a challenge. This is difficult because strategic workforce planning is a very young discipline within HR. I say that it's 30, 40 years old, but it's still a very young discipline. And it is not as well known as it could and should be. So what we end up doing is foreshortening our strategic workforce planning, and it ends up being operational or even just transactional workforce planning. And that, I think, is an issue. So we need to start getting people to look up in the first instance. It's like the 100-meter race. People are running 100 meters with their head down, when at the starting block, and they're just keeping their head down. They're not looking up to see what is like to happen in the future. And I think this is a problem. For an organization of 3,000, what's the organization? What type of organization? What's the market look like internally, externally? How are we expecting that to change? The whole PESTLE analysis I'd be looking at. How is AI changing what we're doing in the organization now? How are people using AI in the organization now? Favorite is a 5-letter phrase, BYOAI, bring your own AI. It's happening in pretty much any organization where people will sit on a train or a tube on their way into work, in London, turn up at the office and turn their AI off. They've been using it, on the tube on the way in, and then turn it off when they get in the office. Or they'll be using a dumb version, a stripped back Copilot, rather than, a hyper-powered Claude or ChatGPT, for example. So we have some really interesting places and real flux, and that flux has happened for two reasons. Firstly, pandemic had a big change on how organizations are. 5-6 years ago, fundamental shift in where we work, and that changed where we work. We used to be somewhere in the region of about 80% of people worked in an office, 20% externally. If you're knowledge work, it's now down to 68% working in one location. 12% of people are now working fully remotely, and 20% of people are working on a hybrid basis. This is in the US. The numbers in the UK are very similar. They're very similar, and that hasn't shifted since 2022. So the shape of work and where we work has changed. So if you're working from home, you don't have a colleague, and then all of a sudden a tool appears which can answer all your questions for you. Why wouldn't you use a large language model? And so we're in a very, very interesting landscape at the moment where you've got people who are working from home, have tools they can use, and are using those tools. We need to get a sense of what that looks like before we can then predict, well, how is that going to change in the future?
Yes, okay. And large language model, you mean AI assistants, such as, for example, Pilot or Gemini,
Copilot, Claude, GPT, yeah.
Actually, that brings me to the point about, are you seeing any examples of, or are you seeing Claude co-work being used yet in the enterprise? Are you seeing that happen?
Yeah. So I've just finished a piece of work with a large pharma company who want to bring AI into procurement within the organization. And it's really interesting to see how it's being brought in. You've got some people who are complete advocates for it. Some people are very much against it. Lots of people in the middle, some people who tried it and didn't like it and have gone back and trying again. It's a very, very mixed space.
Yeah.
What you have got, though, is a commitment from senior leadership that that's what they want to be doing, and that's what they're driving for, and that's what they're targeting, and that's what they're aiming to do. So there is a force behind it within the organization. So as much as people might push back against it, it is going to end up being part of the work that people do. What's interesting is, again, the how people are using it. The overuse is beginning to appear. Every email is being written in the same format, for example, by some people. Other people just not touching it. It's
for me, because that's about, judgment. That's the erosion of judgment, really, of
yeah,
human judgment, I should say.
yeah,
And you end up with this kind of default situation where people are like, well, I didn't even think about it. I've just sort of given that to AI, it's just something it does. So let it do it. Yeah. But I was chatting with people last week where we were saying that the drive has to come, or they were saying it has to come from the top. So they were saying this is the AI transformation has to come from the
yeah.
top. Do you agree with that?
No. Partly it has to come from the top, but Forbes published a report recently on work with Microsoft, and Microsoft found that people were more likely to do it from peers than they would do from senior leaders. And this ties in with Julian Stodd's model around social leadership, where there is a hierarchical authority and social authority. Hierarchical authority is the power, the control that exists within the organization. The social authority is the influence. And you need both. You need a force that's coming down, a force that's and potentially a force that's coming up. If you're in a median role within the organization, there has to be a force from underneath. And I think those forces are existing. The underneath role is the BYOAI. The top down, we are seeing it probably from the wrong reason. We're seeing it as RIF, reduction in force, is the language used around this. So we want to see it from that perspective, but we are also seeing it from peers more. People are sharing more about what they're using these AI tools for now.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because that plays right into my theories. That's worked really well for me. But yeah, one of the things that comes out of that, though, is that if your CEO or your board don't really understand A, the opportunities, and B, the risks of using AI, because they're not using it very well themselves, then that's going to impact, isn't it, on the strategy and what's accepted and where the budgets go.
Very much so. I think we're in a very strange place with AI, though, because you consider it as a tool. It's very different to some of the other tools that have come out that learning particularly has been using over the last couple of decades. And the most common relationship that I draw it back to is mobile phones. So, you and I are both probably of a certain age to remember when mobile phones came into work, and it was like you could use them, you couldn't use them, maybe not. There was rules around them, kind of thing, around how mobile phones were used.
Policies on those.
We had whole policies about whether you could use a mobile device or not use a mobile device and so on. And it feels very much we're in a similar place with AI tools as well. They've crept in. They're a B2C tool. They're a business to consumer tool, not a business to business tool. And as a B2C tool, that means consumers, i.e. your employees, are using them. And they've crept in. And you have to do something in terms of governance or shape or something around how you expect or support or encourage or enable that to happen in the workplace, because people will use them anyway. And AI will become like mobile phones. They just develop different technologies over them. I was really watching a really interesting money program piece from over the last few days from 2003, I think it was, or 2000, when 3G was coming out, and how it was a solution to problems that people hadn't realized yet. And they thought, but who's going to want to watch a video on a small?
Ask these questions.
Why
do I need a phone with me? I've got one at home. I'm not going to listen to people talking to me in the car. I can remember those conversations.
Exactly. And AI is in the same place. It's a solution, and we haven't necessarily understood where it will fit in and how it can fit in. And that's a human problem. That's a capability problem, not a technology problem.
Yes, I mean, I can remember texts. Oh, text. Why would I need text? Well, when you were sort of negotiating your phone package with your provider, and they said, well, you get unlimited text. You're like, what do I want text for? This is a phone, not a texting machine. And yet, of course, I mean, I'm a huge lover of texting rather than speaking on the phone. In fact, I get criticised for it quite a lot by my family, actually. But I didn't ask you, and I should have asked you earlier. We got straight into the conversation. But where do you see yourself on the AI spectrum, Andrew? If naught is sort of, from a 0 to 10 spectrum.
Okay, so there's two measures here. The first one is will, I think and that's a motivation spectrum. So I'm pretty much number 5 compared to people who won't do it, and to people who are fully engaged with it. I would rate myself as a 5. That's because I use it, and I've got paid. I've got 3 or 4 paid AI different accounts I use for different things. However, I'm careful about what I use, how I use it, and so on. So in terms of motivation, I understand the risks and dangers. So I think I sit in the middle. Other people would probably rate me higher. They would probably put me a 7 or an 8. I don't agree. I think I'm nearer the middle. In terms of skill, I think is the second level. So the will was the first measure. The second one is the skill. And I think, again, I'm probably, from an L&D perspective, in the L&D space, I'm probably a 6 or a 7 compared to a lot of people I know. Compared to the experts, I'd be lower down the scale. It really does depend. What I think I am is I've always been a practitioner. So understanding what the tool is and how I can use it, I'm probably going to rate highly. The tools I don't use and I don't know about, then obviously I'm, going to be much further down.
Yeah, and you picked up on something there, which I'm really glad you did, which was you compared yourself to other people. And that is something that, most of us do naturally. We don't know whether or not we express it or share it with others. But that is really important here because, I think we're all doing that in some respect. And people who are a bit nervous about using it are feeling left behind. People who are feeling quite confident are thinking like, oh well, maybe I'm sort of talking about stuff which is far beyond this audience, so I shouldn't really be listening to this. I would say it's really important for us all to talk in the same room because I do think we learn so much from each other. Very much a two-way street. And I'm sure you experience this when you're delivering any services at all. If you've got that person in the room who's sort of like opting out because this is beneath them, they're wasting so much knowledge and so much opportunity at the same time, because sharing that knowledge that they've got is great, but also for them to hear what's going on the ground with other people is so important, isn't it? And that's part of our learning opportunity. So how do you encourage that? How do you get people to actually collaborate together on this topic of AI?
So I don't think you can collaborate, because collaboration requires a shared objective, and my objective will always be different to other people's. So strike the word collaborate out of the dictionary, because it's not something we do. What we do are the things below that. So underneath collaboration comes cooperation. So that's understanding that I have a different objective to you, but I will cooperate and help you achieve your objective if you help me achieve mine. So that's a level below. So that's cooperation. You can't reach cooperation unless you've coordinated. So that's, you have a priority, I have a priority, but they're different. And I can't help you, but I can get out of your way. The level below that, which I think a lot of people sit in the L&D space, is competition. So I'm competing with other people and feel like I'm competing with other people. I can't share, because if I share something, then that gives them an advantage. So the levels, we start at collaboration at the top, then we have cooperation, then we have coordination, and then we have competition at the bottom. Who's doing good stuff that you can cooperate with in order to achieve stuff better?
I saw your posts on LinkedIn about the Fosway report, which was around, for those who perhaps are not familiar with it, it was for CLOs and people who were worried about what sort of LMS should they buy or what should they invest in. And that was a topic I brought up the other day with John Helmer, who said to me, look, if I was the person who could answer that question, I'd be Josh Bursin. It just made me laugh, and I'd be making a lot more money. But then I looked at the Fosway report that you've mentioned, very interesting, answering some of those questions. And And I really was going to ask you, how do you help people sleep at night when they are this, CLO, and they're saying to you, Andrew, there are so many different things I have to take into consideration here. What can I do tomorrow or next week that's going to help me sleep at night?
So the first thing is, don't build a new strategy, because it will be out of date and you're missing something key. The big problem we have around strategies, particularly around things like AI and technologies and so on, is we build them based on where we think things are, and that's not the case. What you first need to establish across the organization are the principles. What are the principles that exist for how we are going to support the organization in the future? For example, we will be data informed. Really simple principle. Okay, and it's one I suggest to pretty much every organization. We will be a professional data-informed learning and development function. Really simple principle. And what you do is you gather together 5, 6, 7 principles just like that and socialize them around the organization. Everybody will sign up to them because they're sensible, they're adult, they're professional, and most importantly, they're business with an I. And then when someone comes to you and
moving
says,
in the same direction, aren't you? You're making those micro wins, those micro gains.
Exactly. And then someone comes to you in the organization and says, I want a training course for managers. You can point at the one says, we're a professional function that's data informed, and say, where's the data supporting the performance of managers, and help me understand how we can improve it. Now, all of a sudden, you're talking as a business engineer, supporting the organization, developing capability, capacity plus ability, and you will be taken more seriously. But the first step is to understand what are the principles, not learning principles, but the principles as to how the learning function will operate. One of them might be AI related. We will incorporate AI into our work. Maybe, maybe not, but that's for you to work through with your organization. Don't make them too wordy, make them simple, and make sure they're socialized around the business first before you then start doing things differently. People want help with that, come and talk to me.
I absolutely love that. I think it is so helpful, and I could really see that giving clarity to people. The people I've got in my mind, who I know I speak with quite often, who are sort of tearing their hair out, wondering where it's all going. And also, it does rather circumvent the problem of what, if you're going to the business asking for its strategy and you're saying, oh, give me the strategy, and then I can see whether or not I'm aligned. One of the big problems that it's almost the elephant in the room is that either the strategy is moving all the time or there really isn't one that's coherent, and that's one of the big problems, I think. Whereas if you've got your principles in place, you can start working towards those in your everyday work, and they're pillars, aren't they, that you can lean on. I really, really like that. Andrew Jacobs, thank you so much. Andrew Jacobs, thank you so much. That has been the most brilliant interview. I really enjoyed talking with you. I always do anyway. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
So that just leaves me to say thank you to listeners for tuning in to the Sovereign Career Hub. And the usual, I will see you again next week. But in the meantime, I shall be putting a deep dive article together on this topic that Andrew and I have discussed today, and also a resource which you heard me mentioning earlier. And I think we'll be taking that Help Me Understand as a very good example, and the pillars which you can tell about. I'm so excited. I can't wait to go and get stuck into those. So please take care. Don't forget to share the podcast with other people if you think that it would help them. And in the meantime, have a great week and enjoy the weather.